Daf Yomi is Shevuos Mem Vav, Shevuos 46, but we're going to start on Mem Hey on the base, 3 lines above where the lines get wide. Back on Mem Hey on the base. Today's daf is dedicated for a Shemir for the Chayalim, that's all for the Shvayim, and the Yeshua for Am Yisrael in this Eis Tzara. So the daf Yomi said yesterday that Shmuel had a position, and actually we're now going to see that Rav is in agreement with Shmuel about this position. And this idea is that if a worker comes and says, you owe me money, you didn't pay me, then the worker is able to take an oath and take the money from the employer. But, says Shmuel, and Rav agrees with this position, that's only in a circumstance where there were witnesses that the worker was hired. But if there were no witnesses, then the employer is believed to say he paid him, because he could have anyways if he was going to lie, say, I never hired you in the first place. And that's exactly what the Gemara is going to say now. When is this halacha that the employee could take an oath and take the money? Only where he was hired with witnesses. But if he was hired without witnesses, because the employer could anyways have said, I never hired you in the first place, he's able to say to him, I hired you and I gave you your money. So Amir Rabin Bar Chama, wow. Amir Bar Chama says, look how beautiful this teaching is. Well, what a beautiful teaching that Rav and Shmuel said. Amalei Rava. So Rav says to him, my Mal Yusa. Good morning, Jeff. What's the big deal about this teaching? If you're correct that he's only believed when he was hired with witnesses, Im Kain, Shevuos Shomrin, which is one of the four biblical oaths. I mean, one of the 3 biblical oaths, the oath of a watchman. If that would be the case, Shevuos Shomrin, the Chayev Rachmana, this oath of the Shomrim that the Torah obligates us. How would we ever have such an oath of a watchman? We're on 45b, 3 lines after the lines get wide. Since the watchman could have anyways always said, you never gave me this deposit to watch. He also could say, Nanensu. He also could say it was destroyed without my negligence. And so therefore, why does he ever have to take an oath if your logic is correct? So the Gemara says, no, Rav and Shmuel would say, the ifkid be'edim. No, they gave it to the watchman with witnesses. And so still the Gemara says, since anyways the shomer could have said, the witness is that the watchman returned it to you, he could have anyways said that he returned it. So therefore you should be believing him to say that it was destroyed by accident without him having taken oath. No, he can't say that he returned it with witnesses, but he can't say that he returned it to him without witnesses. The ifkilei b'shtara, because it was given to him with a contract. And if he'll say he returned it to you, he'll say, well, then you should have taken the contract from my hand. So I have the note. And so therefore the case of where the Torah obligates an oath is where it was given with a note, and that's the only case where the Torah obligates you, the shomer, to take an oath. So then the Gemara says, well, we see from here that both according to Rav and Shmuel, they called the Travail Svirlahu, Hamavked Eitzel Chavero Be'edim, Ein Tzarach Achzer Lo Be'edim, because the only case where Shevuos Shomer applies is where there's a note. But even if he had given it to him with witnesses, he could have said, I returned it without witnesses. So we see from here a principle that if you give something to your friend with witnesses, you don't need to return it with witnesses. But if you get it with a note, then tzarach achzer lo be'edim. So then you would have to return it with witnesses. And now the Gemara is going to introduce a challenge to Rav and Shmuel from Rav Sheshes. But before we see the teaching of Rav Sheshes, we see like an introductory praise to Rav Sheshes. Kari Rabin Bar Chama alei to Rav Sheshes. So Rabin Bar Chama said about Rav Sheshes, Vayasem David es hadvar ma'ela bilvavo. That David took the matters to heart. He paid close attention to things. And that's Rav Sheshes. He paid close attention to things. How so? What's the scenario? The Ashkacha Rav Sheshes, Rav Bar Shmuel. Rav Sheshes was once walking along, and he came in touch with Rav Bar Shmuel. And Amarle, and so therefore Rav Shesha said to Rav Bar Shmuel, Tani Marmidi Bisachir, did you learn anything about a employee? Amarle in, yeah, we learned Tanina Sachir Bizmano Nishba Vinotel that if it's within the time period where he's supposed to get his wages, he could take an oath and take his money. And what does that mean? Kate said, Bizmancha Amarlo Sachartani Velonatati Lischari. So what does it mean? What does this mean? What is this concept? The concept is, wait, did I skip one here? It says Sachar Bizmano Nishba Vinotel. So within his time, he's able within his time. Kate said, "How's it going?" With Mancha, if he says to him, "Sechartani, you hired me, v'unatati litzchari, and you never gave me my money." So this is the price. So we have to remember this price because we're going to be going back over it over the next Amud. So basically, the price is the worker says. If the worker says, I take an oath, good morning, Hobbs. The worker says, I worked for you, you never paid me. Then he could take an oath and take the money. Kate said, what's the scenario? Bizman Shamro, we're 3 lines from the bottom, I'm 45b. So the worker says, you hired me, you never gave me my money. But the employer says, and he says, but I hired you and I gave you your money. Well, then under those circumstances, the employee could take an oath and take the money. But if they argue over the price of the wages, the agreed upon wages, he says, you promised me 2. No, I only promised you 1. Then the employee can't just do it. Then he needs to take then he needs to bring evidence. So says Rav Sheshes. So says Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes responds to this. Amrei, Rav Sheshes says, Hamid Sefer from the fact that the latter case, the case of where he's trying to get the wages and he needs to bring a proof, from the fact he needs to bring a proof, Reisha below Raya. So the first cause was without a proof. And so therefore, since the first cause is without a proof, then we see from here that this is not like Rav Shmuel. Look at Rashi. So it must be that in the first case, when he takes an oath and he can get his money, it's without a proof. He does not need to bring witnesses that it was given to him. And so this is not like Rav and Shmuel, who said that our Mishnah they're talking about a case where it was hired with witnesses. So here we're saying he does not need to say, he doesn't need to bring witnesses. He could just take the oath and take it. So it's not like Rav and Shmuel. So the Gemara says, no, I'm Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. No, Reisha v'Seifa Baraya. No, we're top of 46a. The first clause and the second clause are both with a proof. Raya do Hashem Katani, Raya de Shmuel Katani. No, the case of where he could get him to pay, that type of proof is what the Mishnah refers to. But the case where he says, I get to take a proof so that I could take an oath, that wasn't the category which the Mishnah was taking. So now the Gemara says, Amrav Yirmi Barava Shochu and Rav Lishmuel. So teach us the following. Uman Omer Shtayim Katzatzili. The craftsman says, you promised me 2. V'al Omer Lo Katzatzil Chalachas. And the employer says, no, I only promised you 1. Mi Nishpa, who takes the oath. Amrav Bazu Yishava Balabayas V'Yavsid Uman. He says, well, in this case, the Balabayas, the employer, he takes an oath. What type of oath is he taking? He's taking the Shevuos Eseth. He's taking an oath because he's so basically under this circumstance, Yeshava Balabayas that he only had agreement to 1, and the craftsman lose, and if he doesn't take this oath, he has to pay 2. Because Ketzitza Vada Mitkar Tekire Inchi. Because we say this is not like the case of that he takes an oath and takes the money, which is the case of the worker, because we can't say when it comes to wages, for sure the person will remember. That's the principle in Chi. People always remember the price that they had agreed upon. So the Gemara says, Aini, is this really the case? Tani, Rav Bar Shmuel, Katzatz, so that if in the case of wages, so is it really the case that he needs to take an oath? Don't we say and if he doesn't bring the proof, he should lose the amount. Meaning to say, why do we say in this price that he has to take an oath? Why don't we say and so therefore didn't say that he has to bring a proof, and if he doesn't bring a proof, then he loses it. So why do we say the Balabayas has to take an oath in order to make the craftsman lose his money? Why don't we just say you didn't bring me a proof, so therefore I don't have to take an oath? Amar Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman says, let's start in continue. That's how you have to read this price. He says, "O maybe rayavi." So either the worker brings a proof and gets to take his wages, but if he doesn't do that, "O yishava balabayas v'yafsid uman," or else he has to take an oath about the amount of the wages. This is not a biblical oath, but a rabbinical oath, and then the craftsman loses the money. So now the Gemara says, let's bring a challenge to Rav and Shmuel. So the Gemara says, Meisvei, Hanosein Taliso Uman, somebody gives his garment to the craftsman. Uman Omar Katzatz Talishtayim. Craftsman says, you made a deal with me to give me. So somebody gives he gives his talis to the Uman. The craftsman makes the garment and he says, you promised me 2 for this. So the guy says, I only promised you 1. Calls mancha talis biyad Uman, as long as the craftsman has it. Al Balabayas la diraya. The Balabayas has to bring a proof in order to get it back. But Nisanalo, but if the craftsman gave it back to the Balabayas, Bismano, if it's within the period where he's expected to pay, Nishba hotel, then he takes his money, takes an oath and takes his money. Avarzmano, but once the time passed, then he has to bring the proof. Bismano, but within the amount of time, Mia Nishba hotel, he takes an oath and takes his money. But why? Yishava Balabayas. So this is like the case of agreement upon wages. Yishava Balabayas v'yafsid Uman. Why can't the Balabayas take an oath and then the Uman will lose it? And then the craftsman will lose it. Isn't that what Shmuel and Rav learned that brisa? No, this brisa is the position of Rabbi Yehuda, who says, the Amar calls man, Shevuos note etzel balabayis sachir nishba v'notel. So this is the position of Rabbi Yehuda, who says that whenever there is, biblically speaking, the oath on the employer, or in this case the customer, then the sages instituted that he does not take an oath and be exempt, but the Stachir is the one, the worker is the one who takes an oath and takes it. Even in this case of a craftsman, even in the case of the customer, because the customer has a biblical oath, because it's a partial admission. So that's why Rabbi Yehuda says, he says, even sometimes where it's about wages, the craftsman will take the oath because it's a biblical oath here that's on the customer, because the mode of a mixed death. So we put it back onto the worker here. So that's the position of Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara says, well, where does Rabbi Yehuda say this? So the Gemara says, hi, Rabbi Yehuda. Which Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Yehuda the Masnisin. If you want to say it's the Rabbi Yehuda of our Mishnah, remember, let's go back to our Mishnah. I know it was so long ago. So we did this Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda said in the Mishnah on Mem Gimel, Mem Daled Amud Beis, Rabbi Yehuda says there needs to be a partial admission, meaning to say in the case where In the case of the worker, Rabbi Yehuda, he says he takes an oath and takes it. Rabbi Yehuda says no, he can only take an oath and take it when there's a partial admission on by the employer. So no, but there Rabbi Yehuda is being more severe. Achmuri kamachmir, and here there he's being more severe on the worker, and here he's being more lenient on the worker. So that doesn't make sense. Rabbi Yehuda the Masnisin Achmuri kamachmir did not Rabbi Yehuda Omar Achatesha Miktas Hoda, and so that doesn't work. That Rabbi Yehuda is going to be more severe in the Mishnah when in the Mishnah it was more lenient. So Ella Rabbi Yehuda de Brayso. So it must be Rabbi Yehuda the following Brayso, the Tanya, because we weren't in the Brayso. Sachir calls man shalo avar lov's mano, as long as it's within the time where he typically would be paid. Then the employee harays a nishba v'noto. He can take an oath and take his money. V'mlav eno nishba v'noto. Otherwise, it's too late for it to take the oath and take the money. When is the case that he can't take his money anymore? When is it the case? Says Rabbi Yehuda. When is it the case that we say that he could take this takana and take an oath and take it? That's only in a circumstance. Bisman shamro ten li schari 50 dinar sheyesh li biyadcha. Says, give me the 50 dinar. Uomer his kabalta mehen dinar zav, and the employer says you already got half. Or if it's about the wages. But if he completely denies it, so we see from here in this case that Rabbi Yehuda says that the employee can take an oath in a case where there's a partial denial, only where there's a partial denial by the employer. So the Gemara says, "B'maskefla Rav Sheisha Breder Rav Isha Ela Katzat Rabbi Yehuda V'Lok Rabbanan." So, but we're seeing now that Rabbi Yehuda is being strict about the claim for that he was never paid, but lenient about the salary. So you're saying that the case of Katzat that he wasn't taking oath, that's Rabbi Yehuda and not Rabbanan. Hashte Echad Demachne Rabbi Yehuda Makili Rabbanan. But when it comes to asking for your wages, Rabbi Yehuda is stricter. When it comes to asking for that you weren't paid, Rabbi Yehuda is stricter. Echad Demeka Rabbi Yehuda Mechami Rabbanan. You're saying that the reverse itself, that doesn't make sense, even though theoretically it's possible. The Gemara assumes it's not the case that Rabbi Yehuda will be strict when it comes to saying you weren't paid and lenient when it comes to a disagreement about the wages. Elamai Rabbanan. So it must be that this Bryce where we learned that where they argue about the wages, they can come and take an oath and take it. That must be the Rabbanan. So if that's the case, when it says that if they are about the Katzitza, about the wages, that he has to bring a proof. Who is that? Money, lo Rabbi Yehuda, lo Rabbanan. It's neither one. So who do you want to say it is? Alamar Rava. So therefore Rava says, Rabbi Yehuda summer b'diarais. So this is the nature of the dispute. B'diarais avdulei takanto asachir. If it's a biblical oath, then they made a takana for the. It is the case that that's Rabbi Yehuda's position, even though he's being, in this case, more lenient than he was in the Mishnah. Why? Because it's a biblical oath that falls upon the employer, and so when it's a biblical oath, they made a takana for the employee, and they said we're going to allow you to take the oath. But the Rabbanan have a takanta. But if it was a rabbinic oath, then it will be a takanta. A takanta will have the rabbinic oath is itself just a takana. We don't make a takana for a takana. Rabbanan Savri, but the Rabbanan Nami Avdin and Takanto Sachir. And so the rabbis say by the Rabbanan, we do in fact still make a takana for the employee, but we don't make a takana by wages. Katzitza mitkar dakir. A person's always going to remember their wages. So ironically, they do reverse their positions. That's what they come to, which was it's not shocking. Okay, anyway, so we have to move quicker. Do you have a question, Jeff?
Yeah, just it would be more appropriate for the rabbi to look at the cut on everything rather than modify the rule.
Right.
Couldn't change it.
Okay, that's a deep question. We're gonna have to think about that. It's Yeah, it's a whole onion. So now we said in our Mishnah, Nigzal, that uh, if he claims it was stolen from him, he could take the oath and take it from the person who's accused of being a thief. And what's the case? Kate said, so. The witnesses are testifying, Mashkino. He says, I have to go into your house to get your mashkon. And then he goes out, and this person says, he stole it from me, then the person can get it back. What's the scenario? Mashkino. What do you mean? Well, maybe he didn't have a mashkin. Why can the person in the house just take an oath and take it? Milo Amarav Nachman, there Nachman say, I'm on the Nakin Nargin biyad. Let's say a guy's holding an axe. So Amar Ezel va'aktale ladikla deploying. And he says, I'm going to go and chop down that tree. V'ishtakach the katel. And we found the tree cut down. V'shadi lo amrina and the katle. It's not enough to say that this guy cut it down. So just because he says I'm going to that house to get my mashkon, that's not enough to say that he can go take it out. A person just exaggerates. It doesn't always do it. Yeah, that's a true statement. Person just speaks sometimes. Maybe the guy was just speaking. It's not serious. The Gemara says no. Ema umashkino. No, they saw him take the object. But let's say my mashkino. So then if you saw him take it, then let's see what he took. No, he says he has my utensils. They were underneath his coat, and I want them back. And so he could take an oath. Amar Rav Yehuda. So now Rav Yehuda is going to give a case, which the Gemara is going to qualify in 5 ways. Let's say they saw the guy is leaving with utensils under his garment, and he goes out. He says, I bought them. They see him walking out of Best Buy with a big overcoat. And he says, not Best Buy. They see him walking out of your house. You'll see, it can't be in a store. You see him walking out of your house with a big trench coat. And he says, I bought it. Ain't no Neman. He's not believed to say that he bought it and he has to return the utensils. But this idea that if he's walking out with something, we don't believe him that he bought it. Lo amran ela ba'abayish eno asa limkor. That's where a guy, he's just got a house. He doesn't sell stuff. Ba'abayis also limkor's kelev. But if he's the guy who sells the stuff, Neman, he's believed to say that he bought it. We don't assume a guy's a thief if he has something. Even if he doesn't typically sell it, we only don't say that he has to return it. Only if it's something that he doesn't typically hide. But let's say it's like his medicine. He doesn't want everybody to know that he has, let's say, a medical condition that's private, so that he typically would hide. And so therefore it's not suspicious that he's hiding it. He's believed to say he bought it. And even if it's not something that he typically hides, we always say this if the guy is not typically discreet. A guy is typically discreet. He walks around, very modestly. That's a typical manner in which he walks. So we believe him when he says he bought it. And we always say this, if the owner of the house says, listen, I lent it to you, and this guy says, no, I bought it. But if he accuses him of being a thief, no, we don't believe him. We don't assume that you could just claim the guy's a thief. The guy has to have evidence. We don't just assume you could claim he's a thief. And we also only say this, if there's things that typically one guy borrows and rents out, but if it's something he typically borrows and rents out, then we don't believe him that it's bought. But if it's something that you don't typically lend out, then we believe the guy when he says he bought it. Neman. The Shalch Rav Huna bar Avin, things that are typically borrowed or rented out, and he says, no, I bought them, Eno Neman. That's when he's not believed. The sifra de agata miyasmi. In case where a guy says, I lent the scissors or the sifra de agata. What's a sifra de agata? This is a book of the text of the Agadata. And Rashi says the person typically doesn't study from them, and so therefore they're lent out. But the others farm. You don't lend them out. Like we said, well, yikra imo acher imo, that if you find a book, you can't just study them and let somebody else read them because they're going to get ruined. So you could say that they're bought in this case. So basically, if it's a Sifra de Agadata, which people don't learn as much because they're learning the meat and the potatoes, the Shevuos, they're not learning the Agadata, then you could assume it was borrowed. And that's why you allow them to seize it. But typically speaking, a regular book would be bought. Yeah, so this is what like typically you're not required to lend out your books. Normally you're supposed to lend out your stuff, but your books you don't have to lend out because they're going to get ruined. So one time I was in my house in Brooklyn and I had a plumber. The plumber was Aryeh Kaplan's son. And I said to him, "Oh, your father must have a beautiful library. Can I go and look at it and borrow the books?" And he said, "You know, my father told me. You know what a rare book is? A book you lend out and get back." He said, "Don't." He said, "I'm not lending you anything." So he says, so those are things. I'm a Rava. So Rava says, I feel a shomer. So Rava says, I feel a shomer nishba. Even some, so who could take this? Oh, that which we learned that if witnesses come and say that he entered the house and took the utensils, Balabais can take it. And um, um, and and then the person has to return it. It's not only the Baal Bayis who can take the oath, even the Shomer, even the watchman in the house. I feel Ishtal shall Shomer Nishmas, and even the wife of the watchman could take the oath. So by Papa Stiro Akitomai, what about a hired worker take? Leave it unresolved. I'm only Rav Yirmiyah Ravashi. Tano Bekas but my let's say makes a request for a silver cup. He says, You took my silver cup from me. So we say, "My, what's the law? Chazine inish to amidu inish to maminu mafati inshi gabe nishtav shakali low." So we have to see if this is a guy who typically has a silver cup in his house. Then he's believed that this guy took it, and then he can take the oath and take it. Neach Balkate said if the guy says you wounded me, then you take the oath that this guy damaged him. So Amar Rav Yehuda Mashmo lo shana el b'makom sheyachol chabal atzmo. When do we say that he's believed to say you damaged me, to take an oath and then get paid? That's and he has to take an oath. That's only in a case where he could have hurt himself. But if it was and basically on his back, basically then he has to take an oath. But if it was a place where he couldn't have damaged himself, then for sure he's believed. No tel shelo b'shvuah. He's believed even without the oath. Mar says, wait, maybe he just ran into a wall. So why do you believe him there? So Tani Rebbe Chia also on a shicha begabo bein atzil yadav. No, it wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't have worked. Basically, it's like a case where you have on his back or between his armpits, and that was, and so therefore, it clearly wasn't. It was a bite on his back or between his armpits, so it clearly wasn't from a wall. So it's clearly talking about a case where he got it from the person. Doma achar avidlei. Maybe somebody else in the house did it to him. No, deleka achar. There was nobody else in the house. So yeah, it's not so simple that you can take it off. There needs to be some corroborating circumstantial evidence. Okay, shkoyach. This is today's beautiful daf. We'll pick it up, God willing, at 8 o'clock.